gotta talk to Gage.
Xenoblade 1, it was so good. Xenoblade 2 is after me. It was so... The story was bad. The gameplay was bad at first. No, but it became good! Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a beautiful mess. So, as most of you already know, I recently went back and replayed Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition for the second time. The experience was overall really great, and I do recommend playing that game if you've never checked it out before. But after enjoying that game, I decided I would commit to playing through the entire trilogy to see where the franchise went. I decided after I made that last video that I wanted to continue this saga and see it through to the end. So this brings us to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Something I sometimes try to avoid is listening to others' opinions extensively on a game before I make my own video talking about it. I guess I feel like this will make my thoughts my own, and then after I make my video, I really like to listen extensively to other people's thoughts on a game or a story. That's why I really enjoy listening to these long video essays that are here on YouTube. That's the kind of review and analysis that I am doing for you all here today. So if you enjoyed this kind of content, then be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss more of me in the future. But with all that said, let's dive right into this. So my initial thoughts is, no matter how much I enjoy certain aspects to this game, it was always going to be a huge disappointment to me. And really there is a lot of good as well. And that's what we're gonna talk about here in this video a little bit later. There is a lot that I found very disappointing coming off the heels of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. Things that just ultimately kind of weaken the trilogy as a whole and just make this game not nearly as fun to play or replayable in my opinion. But let's just jump into gameplay first. Let's talk about that first. So the first thing I need to point out, because it was probably the thing that annoyed me the most in terms of gameplay, was the environmental abilities in this game. So basically, there's this mechanic in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that was new to this game called the Blades mechanic. Now, we're going to talk more about that mechanic later, but I need to bring it up now because part of the Blade mechanic is that you have these sort of like this gacha mechanic where you can summon at random these different creatures which are called blades. Sometimes they look like humans, sometimes they look like animals or something else. But the idea here is each of them have their own set of abilities, in battle and outside of battle. The outside of battles are the abilities that annoyed me the most, and here's why. Because whenever I would go to a point where there was an environmental puzzle where you needed certain abilities or you needed a certain level of abilities, it annoyed me to no end how even if you had summoned a certain blade that had that ability or could help to do this puzzle, you had to equip them. It literally wasn't enough to just have them in your party, even though a majority of the blades in your party are just going to be the generic ones already. So that really annoyed me a lot at multiple points in the game, because there are certain points where you literally have to have a certain level of these environmental abilities in order to progress the game, and this annoyed me so much. It really did. Like, I'll tell you, something that just broke the flow of gameplay for me was getting to almost the very end and finding a door where I needed to go back and grind for something really specific and dumb in order to get more focus, as an example, on some of my blades. So that's just something that I personally found very annoying to deal with, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. Let's talk a little more about some more of this gameplay. So the gameplay in the beginning of the game is honestly atrociously slow and really boring, at least at the start. And that's what I have to say with this, because when you first start up the game, it's so simple. And you know, a lot of you might be watching this video saying like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Pretty much most games should start out at least relatively simple and grow from there, which I agree with you, and that's what Xenoblade 2 does, but I think it just takes way too long before things really get going and just being fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie to y'all, like when I first started Xenoblade 2, I was actually considering like putting it down, like that thought went into my mind. I really wanted to see it through, but I was just so
bored. It was so slow and sluggish. You couldn't move and auto attack at the same time, so you were stuck in one place. I was not a fan. I really was coming down on this game, not gonna lie. Another point is the game in nearly every aspect makes a horrible first impression. So not just in terms of gameplay or the blade mechanic or all this different stuff, really just in its entirety. Including story, which we are going to talk about more later, it's just a horrible first impression. Here's your warning: if you've never played Xenoblade Chronicles 2 before, this game is slow. It's really slow at the beginning. So after beating this game, yeah, the gameplay, like I said, is pretty solid and quite possibly better than the original, at least in some ways. And in some ways, not so much, but as far as playing it, I had a lot of fun with it. By the end of the game, when you have so many more things going on, way more blades, way more characters, it just became way deeper and more complex and more fun for me personally. So now let's talk a little bit more about that blade mechanic I brought up earlier. So the good in this mechanic is the different play styles it brings to the table. So you can have up to 3 blades equipped at any given time to any character. So you can equip 3 blades per character, which is pretty cool. And it basically allows you to switch between them mid-combat, which changes their arts, which is basically your actions or your abilities in battle. And it changes some of your stats and it changes some of your abilities. It does a lot. So for me, that was the cool part. I really liked that. I liked how at any moment you could, swap out a different blade, and then there was like elemental weaknesses and strengths and that kind of thing going on, and then there was like chain attacks with those elemental abilities, and that was really cool. That's the best part about the blade mechanic, is I like how dynamic it feels and how interesting it can make the gameplay. The bad, and honestly I think that there is a lot of bad to this mechanic. For one, again with that bad first impression, it felt like it was a lackluster JRPG put onto a mobile game. That's what it really felt like. And something else that isn't really helping the blade mechanic is the fact that there is like very few actually interesting designs for the blades. 90% of these things are just going to look the exact same. They all have like the generic same look with like the gray skin, the blue eyes. I think it's like the white kind of armor aesthetic thing going on. Really boring. Yeah, they have different abilities and all that kind of stuff, but it's just kind of boring to use those. So I really didn't for most of my playthrough unless it was an environmental puzzle. So that's kind of lame coming off of a game like Shin Megami Tensei 5 that has a bunch of different creatures, or even Pokemon. There's so many different designs and stuff, and I'm not saying they should have made that many, but for me that was just something that made it kind of boring, not gonna lie. And of course summoning them, like I said, it's basically like a mobile game where you like summon random heroes, and it's not my favorite idea for a game like this, especially if you need a certain ability or a certain blade. It can be kind of a chore to summon multiple at once. It's not as easy. It's just like selecting how many you want to summon. You have to do it one at a time, and it's just kind of slow overall. So another thing is the UI in this game, at least in battle, is vastly improved. I will say it that way, because in battle, in the first game, something that always annoyed me was how the aggro meter, which is, the circle under your character, basically, it's not really a meter, but it would show who was being targeted by the enemy. This is a cool idea, but the problem for me was always that the arts were always along the bottom of the screen, so it made it hard to see who was being targeted. And you can move the camera around, but ultimately it became kind of a hassle to really like pinpoint exactly where you should have the camera. It was kind of annoying. This game improved it because now the UI elements are in the corners of the screen, and specifically in the bottom, they're on the bottom left and right of the screen. So in the middle is cleared up, so it's easy to see if you're being targeted, and I definitely really appreciated this change. So another thing I was not a huge fan of at first and even hated was how many shops there are. So when you get to, I believe it's Torgoth, which is the first town that you reach in the game, it had so many icons on the screen, so many stores that you could go to. I just found it to be so ugly to look at. I was like, all these blue icons on the screen, and like the frame rate like slows down just a little bit, and I was just like, it looks really hideous to me. And I was like, I don't want to mess with this many different stores. Why couldn't it just be in one store and you can buy all these different types of items? But I eventually did grow to appreciate this at least a little bit more. Yeah, it slows you down when you're trying to find that one specific item, but I don't know, it kind of brings the world to life a little bit more, because most JRPGs, you can't interact with that many different shops, and it only makes sense that there are that many that sell different types of products in a given town. So I kind of like it. It's not that bad. So between all the blades, you will have the items too. It can sometimes be a little much to manage easily. So sometimes you'll spend a long time in the menus, re-equipping weapons for all of your many blades that you'll end up with by the end of the game. And then your pouch items, which is what you buy from the shops, and your equipment, and then the crystals that you assign to your blades. It just is a whole lot to deal with and manage. And sometimes that can be sort of annoying, especially to players who don't want to go as deep with these mechanics as others may want to. For me personally, that was definitely something that slowed down the gameplay. Oh, and really quick, I'm not like a music genius or anything like that, but I just want to say the music is amazing in this game. There's only a few tracks that I maybe am not a huge fan of, but majority of them are amazing, and definitely songs I'm going to be listening to outside of playing this game. So now this brings us to the story, the second biggest chunk of this game that I wanted to talk about here with all of you. So the first thing that I have to point out in this section is the tone of this game's narrative. It is all over the place, and honestly, this is probably my single biggest complaint about Xenoblade Chronicles 2, is just how wrong the tone is in this game. It really feels like the first half of the game especially, it feels so much more generic. You can see this in the art style, it being more just kind of generic anime. At least to me, that's how it looks to me. But then the tropey characters and the fan service and the goofiness, it just feels not Xenoblade to me. The beauty of Xenoblade 1 was how dramatic and grounded and even kind of dark the story got at times, and for me that was what made it so unique. Like, there's nothing like Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and I don't know if I said that in my video about that game, but to me, that is the highest praise I can give to Xenoblade 1. In certain areas, that game hasn't aged the best, but there's nothing like Xenoblade 1. Like, you have probably never played anything quite like Xenoblade Chronicles. It was amazing. This though, you've played things like this, or at least you have seen, experienced characters and stories like Xenoblade 2. It just feels way more generic, less special and unique.
Turtles, reveal yourself! Huh? Turtles? 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 Where are you, boy? Turtles! Turtles! Handling a man's turtle. Talk all you want, because those words will be your last!
That's probably my biggest complaint with Xenoblade 2. So this is actually something that stood out to me, as the tone of the story's second half was way more in line with the original Xenoblade Chronicles. And that was kind of weird. It was really odd to me how the first half especially had way more like goofy moments and just like kind of dumb, immature humor, things like that. And then the second half especially really picked up, and it started to feel more like Xenoblade to me, at least the first game. So that was a weird juxtaposition. But now you might be asking, how are the characters? How are the characters in this game? What do I think about them? Well, overall, by the end of the game, they're okay. Now, this might seem kind of like a hot take. Some people might think I'm being a little too critical, but I did not like certain ones at all at first. But I will say, as the game progresses and it goes on, things do pick up, and I will say, you know, I think the characters are passable. They're not my favorite. They're certainly not on the heights of Shulk or, for me personally, Rein or Dunban from the first game, but they have pretty decent moments and really cool interactions sometimes with the other party members. So in some ways, that was maybe better than how Xenoblade 1 handled it, because Xenoblade 1, as I said, I believe in that video, is very much plot driven than it is character driven. This one seems like it was focusing a little bit more on the characters, which I do appreciate that. I think that is pretty cool in some ways. That kind of brings us to my biggest problem with the characters, and that is the voice acting. So I've played my fair share of dubbed games from Japan. Whenever I think of amazing dubs, I always think of games like Fire Emblem Three Houses, or Fire Emblem Shadows of Valentia, or I think of the first Xenoblade Chronicles. I think of things like this that have some amazing voice acting, or even Persona 5 Royal. I think all of these games have excellent, amazing voice acting. That's really solid, especially Three Houses. Going back to Xenoblade 2, the voice acting in this game is rough, man. Like it is honestly atrocious at times. It is shockingly bad, and I've never seen this before. I've never experienced voice acting this bad in a video game, or really anything. I don't think, at least anything I've sat down and experienced for myself. So originally, I could not get past certain characters' voices just being so awful. The best example I can point to is how Rex, whenever he yells, or it's like an emotional scene and he's like hollering out to like Pyra or something, his voice acting just does not sell it. It sounds awful and it's really cringy. I compare that to the first Xenoblade. Shulk was amazing. Like that guy that voiced him did such an amazing job, and it was honestly some of the most believable voice acting I've seen in a JRPG like this. So I just don't understand how they went from the heights that was Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and that voice acting, and then the voice acting in 2 being some of the worst I've ever seen in my life. Not every character was that as bad, but so many of them are just straight up horrible, and I don't know what happened here. And it is really sad, and it takes me out of the experience. And that was a huge problem for me, is that so many points in this game, I was taken out of the experience. And I think that comes down to two biggest things, and that's the tone of the story being so at odds with each other, and then the voice acting feeling just so bad at times. And it really took me out of the experience. So emotional moments just did not land as well at all for me, just because I wasn't able to pay attention because of Rex's voice and it just being so bad. And it's not his accent I'm inherently against, because I like the accents in the first game, but it's just the talent there. Something's wrong, like something went really wrong in this game's voice acting. But that's just my opinion on the subject. The jokes in this game, it just feels really immature, honestly, which is really weird when you learn how complex and deep this game can be to play. So it feels like they tried to appeal to everybody and not the core Xenoblade Chronicles fans up to that point. So it feels like they were trying to bring in a larger audience with this game and ended up kind of disappointing the original fans in the process, because at least from my perspective, looking into this sort of fan base, it seems like you're either a Xenoblade 1 or Xenoblade 2 kind of guy. If we don't include Xenoblade 3 into the discussion, I think most people's favorite is 3 now. But this is the point in the video where I need to give a huge spoiler alert, a spoiler warning. If you want to play this game for yourself one day, you want to experience the story, maybe click off the video and come back at a later time after you finished it and seen the ending, because I want to talk a little bit about this ending and where it leads going into the third and final game. So that's your warning. Click off the video or skip to the very end. But with that being said, let's dive right into it. So leading up to the ending of this game was pretty cool. There was a lot of interesting things that were developed and pointed out. Amalthus and Jin's backstories were really sad and dark and interesting, but really not nearly developed enough. And these were two big antagonistic characters in the story, and I just feel like maybe they could have done more or just done it a little bit differently. It ended up not really leaving much of an impression on me personally. So from my experience playing this game, all the villains in this game just don't leave a lasting impact on me personally. But I will say, finding Klaus at the end of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was extremely hype. And the reason this was extremely hype to me was because this is the same guy who went on to become Zanza in the first game. Like, that was so mind-blowing wild to me. I was waiting for something like this to happen. I was like, dang, bro, like Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and it seems like its own story, but I know 3 kind of ties things together a little bit more. Even just looking at the cover of Xenoblade 3 kind of tells you that. So I was like, oh, you know, it's got to end some way, like combining, you know, like there's got to be something. And here it was this moment whenever Klaus came on, and it was the original scientist dude in space from the first game, you know, that created this new world, and then his other half became Zanza. And then literally while Rex and crew, they're doing their thing, Shulk was doing his thing at the same time. Klaus knows this because he even mentions that his time is coming where he's gonna die and both versions are going to be dead. And they even played a voice clip from the first game from Shulk in this cutscene. It was so cool. So that was quite the amazing realization and twist in the story, is that was the guy at the top here. So really cool stuff with that one. I will say the ending itself has me extremely excited where the story in the third game goes, because at the very end of this game, the two worlds do combine. At the very end, I was waiting for Shulk to come on screen. Turns out he didn't, but I was really waiting for that. I was hoping that he would. But it seems like at the end of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, they travel to the Xenoblade 1 world, and now it's all just come to this point, and that has me really hyped for where it could go in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That's probably the thing I'm most hyped about and excited to see, is just how everything kind of comes together, because you've put both of these worlds in the same universe. So I'm very excited to see where this story goes and where the sequel goes in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So to wrap things up, in many ways, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 feels like the Fire Emblem Engage of Xenoblade, in that it feels like a game that is so 50-50, split down the middle. The gameplay is great, but it will take you many hours before it gets good. Well, do you like a good JRPG story? Well, again, sorry, aside from a few good or great moments here and there, you have to put up with this very generic and tropey feel until around the halfway point of the game, till it really gets going. So it is a good game, maybe even great, but it feels like a game so full of 50-50s. But with that is where I'm currently at with my Xenoblade Chronicles journey. This video was a doozy. It was a very interesting one to put together. I tried to keep the script on this one a bit more loose and just kind of let it breathe a little bit. Let my own personal thoughts really shine through in this video, and try not to get so bogged down with trying to read the script word for word. So hopefully you all enjoyed this slightly different style of video. I'd really like to do my videos a little bit more like this, you know, keep them structured and still have my notes in front of me, but just try to speak from the heart a little bit more, be a bit more genuine in the moment, and share what was on my mind and what I wanted to share with all of you. So yeah, that's where we are. I'm extremely excited to play Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I'm excited. I'm excited to see where the story goes and to see how they develop the gameplay. But yeah, I thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. If you didn't, I thank you for watching this long. And don't forget to engage that subscribe button down below. But with all that being said, I will see you all in the next video. God bless.
I wish I knew.